right now. No, I'm just kidding. First off, we have Robert Workman.
Hello, everybody. I am a staff writer for Comic Books WWG video game page. I'm also a co-host of the another retro gaming podcast on the RetroZap.com network. So thanks for having me. Atlanta is lovely.
Thanks for coming. Next, we have Hannah Abihana.
Hi. I'm a character animator. I recently worked on a game called Cuphead. I think that's why I'm here. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on this panel.
Awesome, we're glad you're here. And last we have Jonathan Yang.
I'm Matt.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh no, my notes are wrong.
But anyway, I was just told to show up here. I might be. No, I am the managing director of Blue Mammoth Games. We're a studio up in Alpharetta, and we recently were acquired by Ubisoft, so we are now Ubisoft Atlanta. But we make a game called Brawlhalla, which is, if you've ever played, it's a sort of a platform fighter that's on PlayStation and PC, and before that I worked at Cryptic Studios on games like City Heroes and Star Trek Online.
Sorry about the mix-up. And last we have Miss Andrea Sharon.
Yeah.
Hello. I currently work for Stride PR. We're a boutique PR agency. We work with a lot of indie games. And I used to be on the journalist side, and I wrote for sites like VG247 and RPG Site.
So obviously we have a wide variety of people within the gaming industry here. So please start thinking about your questions now, because we will do some Q&A at the last 30 minutes. So we're really excited to hear from you guys and what you guys might be thinking about. So we're gonna start off with something kind of general and easy, yeah? So where did you guys get your start in your careers?
Start with me? So it's kind of hard to say where the starting point was, because my answer is I want to be like, I was 10 years old and on a forum, and I really liked games. So my segue into this career was through games journalism. A few years ago, I say a few years ago, this was 2002 or so. I was like 11, and I was on a Final Fantasy forum with a bunch of friends. And they remembered me a few years later on Twitter and were like, hey, do you still write about games? And I was like, yeah. So we got some money together, went to E3, and that was with RPG Site. That kind of segued a few years later into writing for outlets like VG247, and I went to Gamescom for that, and that was awesome. And now I'm doing PR. I actually got my graduate degree in PR and worked for a university for a while, but now I'm applying that knowledge that I learned there into games. So now I work with Stride PR, and I work with a lot of awesome indie games. So we work with like Super Daryl Deluxe and BioInk Redemption, Solo, just to name a few. Yeah, that's about it.
And, well, I was graduated out of high school, and I took up a job as a debt collector, which I do not recommend, ever, unless you like death threats. And in 1999, I just, started writing about video games, because I'd been loving video games my whole life. Big kid in the 80s, just playing stuff like Asteroids and Galaga and stuff. And then 99, I decided to put my writing skills to good use and started just doing fan writing. In 2000, a buddy of mine named John Benjamin, who's still a good friend of mine, ran a site called Sega Dojo. He hired me to do fan writing for him, and he blew me out to E3. My first E3 was in 2000, the glory days of Mario Tennis and Nintendo 64, by the way. Yes. And that's when I really just started picking up steam with my writing career. In 2005, I got my first full-time writing gig with AOL Game Daily. And ever since, it's just been really rolling and rolling. And eventually now I've landed at Comic Book with their new WWG video game site. We've been really picking up in numbers. We've got a full group going to E3 in a couple of weeks. So it just really just built up. It started with something small, just something I wanted to do out of passion. People noticed. And ever since, it's just been really something that's been pretty phenomenal. I mean, I love my job. It does have its downfalls. You run into people who hate you for something, but, you just roll with the punches, and it's a really good job. Talk more about it a little bit.
Yeah, so my segue into games was through wanting to be a traditional animator. I studied 2D animation And if you're a 2D animator today, you have to bounce around different industries and kind of go where the work is. And my first job as a traditional animator was doing cutscenes for a game called Sly Cooper: Thieves in Time. So I got a job at a company called Ghostbot, and that's what they were working on, among other things. I've gone in and out of games. I've worked in advertising and television, and most recently in like a 2D feature film. And a few years ago, I was reached out by a company in Canada that was working on Cuphead, and that was actually the first like paper animated thing I had done since college. So that was sort of a dream job in the sense that I'd always wanted to do like really classic kind of paper animated stuff, and you know, Cuphead came sort of out of nowhere, and it was a really fun game to work on.
We love Cuphead at Blue Mammoth Games. We're very much a 2D studio, and when Cuphead came out, we were like, yes, everything is hand drawn. That's exactly what we're going for, except we can't quite do it because we have too many characters and not enough staff. But I love the hand drawn look. I'm a programmer. So it was pretty straightforward to get into the industry. I got a job as a game programmer, and this was at Cryptic Studios in 2000. And I was a graphics programmer to start out with, and then kind of moved along from there. But yeah, entirely through programming.
Wow. Awesome, guys. Okay, here's a fun one. What's the most underrated game? Take your time, mull it over.
People are going to make fun of me.
It's okay. We all love you.
Okay, so I really love Xenosaga, and no one talks about. And it was canceled too early. I'm using this platform right now to say that. But I think my 10 hours of cutscene game is very underrated, and I wish people talked about it more when we look back and reflect on JRPGs, but we don't.
Hey, we love it, it's all right. You know, I could sit here all day. I could say, like, you know, I love the Klonoa games, the Maximo games, but, you know, anything by Treasure. I think, like, Gunstar Heroes only got its due after it started getting included in, like, you know, Sega Genesis collection, like Sega Genesis Classics coming out on Tuesday. You know, Ikaruga, that's coming out on Switch this Tuesday. I highly recommend it. Radiant Silver Gun, Guardian Heroes, these guys make some of the best damn games on the planet, and yet, you know, only now people are starting to catch, wait, these games are amazing. Well, you know, and like in their heyday, that was the best way to really discover them. But it's just nice to see that second chance to see these people check these games out. And I don't know, I really think they're a great studio. I mean, it kind of ties in with a little something. It's like they used to work with Konami, then they left Konami, and then Konami hired them to make Gradius 5 for PlayStation 2. That's my idea of a success story, I think. It's kind of cool. So, yeah, I'd say anything by Treasure.
I might have to pass on this one. 'Cause, I mean, I will say, though, that indie game developers are just, you know, more and more becoming sort of the driving force of trends in games. I know it used to be the big studios, but the tools are making it so that anybody can develop a game and push the visuals and the quality and the storytelling in ways that we could never do before. So I feel like, you know, all indie developers are kind of driving that. And yeah, sorry, I didn't have a better answer to this.
No, I don't have a great answer either, but that's a good answer, definitely, with the indie developers. Yeah, no, I'm going to speak for 2D games in general. I was thinking about what I'm playing right now. I'm playing Dragon Crown. I'm playing Darkest Dungeon. I'm playing... I played Shank recently, that kind of stuff. Those 2D games that, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but the 2D games that have all of the gameplay of a 3D game, but it's clear what exactly the developer wanted to accomplish with the art style is something I've really been enjoying lately.
Okay. All right. I'm coming back to you, Hannah.
Okay.
I already told you about this anyways. So, and I know this firsthand because it is very, very hard. It's such a major balancing act between applying to jobs and networking and making connections, especially when you're not in the industry yet. and you guys are all welcome to touch on this if you like. And I'm just wondering, do you guys have any experience with what, like, possibly the perfect balance would be, or how you should be spending your time when you have to break it up into all those categories?
I think the toughest part is making sure that you don't become too negative. Because, I mean, like, with my social stuff, I always try to spread out my links. I try to talk about, like, games. I'll be like, hey, guys, do you remember when that awesome moment happened in Ghosts and Goblins? You know, that was really great on the NES, although it kicked my ass. But you have those things, but then you run into stuff like, well, negative issues. Like, lately, this week, what became a hot topic for some reason is that some people didn't think women didn't belong in Battlefield 5, and then all of a sudden you have these stories come out of the woodwork talking about, well, these soldiers fought in World War II, although why don't they belong? And then all of a sudden it was an unnecessary argument. And you know, you make your comment real quick, it's like they do belong, that's it, end of story, and that's when the negative people come, and you really don't want to drop down to the point that you've forgotten why you're doing social media. And it can be a bit tough, it can, you know, because you have these a-holes who just pretty much, oh, you're wrong, you know, and I've had my fair share of that, but it's trying to maintain a positive level, I think. Just trying to be like, you know, I'm just going to put this out there, this is what I'm saying about it, moving on, let's talk about Sega Genesis games or something, you know, and it could be a little overwhelming, especially when they, you know, dig a little too deep, but I think it's just a matter of remembering who you are and maintaining that level, not dragging yourself down there with them, you know, just keep your ground.
So I know the right answer to this. That's a very good point. The specific question of how much networking you need to do is more than you're doing right now. Is specifically the right answer, and this is particularly true of talented folks, talented artists, talented programmers, talented writers, is they get very, very focused on what they're doing and the projects they're working on, which is hugely, hugely, hugely important. But the amount of value that can come out of just going to a local game group, going to a local industry get together, that you think is, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna talk to some people and it's gonna be fine, or it's gonna be, I'm gonna get to the end of it and I'm gonna be like, well, I really wish I'd spent, I mean, you know, you talk to people, you have a good time, but you're like, I could have spent that evening working. Those things historically pay off, and I know for a fact because they paid off for me and they paid off for people who I know who do them, and I've seen extremely talented people struggling because they don't know anybody and they don't know how to apply a job, they don't know what job to apply for, and they don't know what people want because they're not out talking to people. And this is honestly true of some of my artists, you know, the artists at Blue Mammoth Games, where I'm like, you're not going to want to work at Blue Mammoth Games your entire life. I mean, maybe you will, but you know, go out and be doing this kind of stuff, and they don't want to, and I'm like, go. Anyway, so there's my lecture on that, more than we're doing right now.
You should offer to pay them for doing it.
Okay, well, I'm not going to go that far.
Free Arby's. Right?
Yeah. I mean, then I think the networking thing is it's a tricky one for artists who, by nature, are kind of introverted and want to just like sit in a room and do the work, and we don't want to go out and talk to people. But it's so dependent sometimes on who you know. I mean, the first step is to get your work to the quality that it needs to be, but it doesn't end there. And we always think that like, oh, I just have to get good enough, and then somebody's gonna find me. But yeah, you really come to realize that a lot of it is having the work, but also having the luck of it falling in front of the right person at the right time. One thing I did early on that worked for me is not waiting for job postings to apply for a job. Just send your work to studios that you think, you know, would be a good fit for you, and most of them are not even going to reply to you, but you never know. You know, somebody might see it and kind of put it to the side and go like, oh, that's an interesting portfolio, and we're not looking for someone right now. But once they do start looking, you know, maybe you're kind of close to the top of the list, because when you do wait for a job listing, usually it's like you and 1,000 other people, and even if your work is really good, it might get kind of lost in the crowd, or you know, there might be somebody better than you, or somebody more well connected than you, then that maybe their work is on par with yours, but they also come with a personal reference, so that person's going to get kind of, you know, a bigger voice in terms of who they choose. Yeah, and I think, you know, stay connected with your peers. Don't burn bridges. I think having good relationships with clients goes a really, really long way. You know, having one happy client or producer is very, very valuable, because they're going to vouch for you for the next thing. And what you don't realize, you know, before you get in the industry is how much word of mouth is worth. Because before any job listings go out, usually what companies do is they'll send an email to all their artists and say, do you know someone who's perfect for this job? And it's only once they've gone through like all the personal recommendations, that's when they start reaching out to like strangers online. So if you can get into that like pool of knowing somebody, even though it sounds very unfair, you know, that's sadly how it is.
To speak to Hannah's point about that, that's how I got every job I've held, is emailing someone first.
Yeah.
I've applied for jobs before with no luck, and that is crushing. But I emailed someone and I reached out to someone, and whenever you're a recent graduate, it's kind of scary to get out there and realize that you're competing against so many people. So one of the first things I did was I looked at one of my favorite games and I was like, I want to work in PR, and I emailed the PR head and he responded. I didn't have a job offer from him at the time, but he took time out of his day to essentially write me a novel to tell me like everything that he thought I should be doing, and it gave me an edge. And if you kind of look at these people that you admire in the industry, whoever it may be, I think you'll find that they're a lot more welcoming, even though they seem really big and you can't talk to them, it's very intimidating. People are welcoming, and so I encourage you to reach out to those people. You'll be surprised who's willing to stop and mentor you for a moment. And then I also had a business professor tell me in undergrad that networking is the most valuable skill you'll learn, while I was sitting in the middle of his class that had nothing to do with networking. But it is, it's important, and it's not just about finding someone, who can hook you up with a job. It's fostering these relationships, and maybe they will remember you later on, and that's helped me a lot.
Sorry, I'm that was awesome. Yeah, because, you know, I'm sure a lot of you guys are young artists, and it's very nice to hear all that. So this is kind of changing gears. So within the past 10 years, gaming platforms have expanded and changed so rapidly. You guys above everyone else would definitely know that. And I just wanted to ask, where do you guys think the game industry is going, and do you guys think possibly VR could take over?
VR is kind of in a niche right now. I mean, there are VR games growing out there, but not everybody can afford a $300 PlayStation VR headset. Nobody can afford $200 Samsung. And some people like simplicity. You know, they'll buy a Nintendo Switch because they want to play games that way instead of actually putting on a helmet, making sure they have 12 feet of room, and, you know, doing all this. I mean, not that VR is not innovative. There are some great games out there, but most people just want to, when they play games, they just want to chill and relax in front of a TV, just like the good old days. And the interesting thing about the industry is that we've seen such an uprising in indie games over the past few years. We've seen stuff like Shovel Knight, like Celeste, like just this week, Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, which is an amazing throwback to the old school Castlevania days. Everybody I know is talking about it, and for good reason. So it just seems like, to me, it's not really so much about a VR boom, but how indies kind of just finding its place. You know, Microsoft's supporting it with ID Xbox, Nintendo's got the Nindies, Sony's got its support, and we're really just seeing this major outreach, and they seem to blend right in with the AAA games. Like if you go to the eShop menu, you'll see, like, you know, Hyrule Warriors, but you'll also see the indie games surrounding it instead of it, you know, separated from it. So over the next few years, I really think we're going to see more of these indie games on the rise, and more studios take interest. You know, like Ubisoft in Brawlhalla and Blue Mammoth, and we're really going to just see what more these guys can do, and it's going to be amazing stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and you know, kind of bringing it back to the breaking into the industry aspect of it, I really have no idea what VR is going to do. I don't know, but I do know that, like you were saying, the strength of the tools that indies have available to them, free or for low cost, to create a new project, is so much better than it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago. And your ability, if you're a 3D person, to just pick up Unreal, pick up Unity. If you're, and we talked about networking as being super important, but it is not anywhere near as important as your personal projects. Because the other one, the networking gets people's attention. It's your personal projects, especially if you don't have a history, with other studios or things like that. That creates a history for you. And employees are extremely interested in that. And so one of the things that particularly for programmers, for an artist, you can look at a portfolio and you can kind of imagine. For a programmer or a game designer, especially a game designer, if you're not working on projects that you have a vision for being able to complete, you're probably working on the wrong thing. That the tools out there, like we were talking about, are really amazing now, and that is creating a work history for you. Even if your vision is not to be your own indie developer long term, that's hugely important. Although I'll throw out modding as well. If you don't want to start from scratch, mod.
Okay. What game series has been the best to follow in its entirety? Do you guys like any long-term series that you guys have gone, okay, it's a good start and it's just blown up in your eyes?
Yeah, we're gonna be here all day. But no, I mean, some of the series, it's just amazing to see how they've grown. Like, you imagine like The Legend of Zelda from 1986, oh, this is a great adventure and everything. And then you go over the years, then we got stuff like A Link to the Past, A Link Between Worlds, Ocarina of Time, and now Breath of the Wild, and now they're working on the next big adventure, stuff like that. And of course the Mario games too. We've seen we started with Super Mario Brothers, then we went into 3D with Super Mario 64 rather, and then obviously we went to like 3D World. We went to Sunshine, like it, hate it, it's still different. And now we've got Super Mario Odyssey, which is considered like one of the best. So. Nintendo really knows how to take care of their franchises, and we've seen some bumps with Metroid, but now we're getting Metroid Prime 4, and even like Bayonetta in just 2 games has grown so much, and now we're getting Bayonetta 3. So, that's not to say Nintendo's the only one really growing at the franchises, but they really seem to know, like, what buttons to push, what chances to take in terms of showing an evolution of their series, and it's just really remarkable. Like what their teams are capable of. And that's why, like, in a couple of weeks when they do like their Nintendo Direct, everybody's going to be watching. What's the next evolution of Smash going to look like? What's the next Pokemon game going to look like? All eyes are on that. Not that Microsoft and Sony's going to be boring. They're going to have great stuff too, but people are going to be like, what is Nintendo up to? That's why.
Cool.
Watching a series, I don't have a series that I particularly feel like I think something cool to watch turn around from a PR perspective was Final Fantasy XIV, and to talk to people working on that, and to talk to PR people working on that, and you can watch the documentary that they did on it, and to have all these PR people scrambling like, oh no, what are we gonna do? Because it's not good, and they're pretty open about that first iteration of it. It was amazing to sit down and talk to those folks. I have many times about that turnaround, and to watch that process take place, and to see something that really just bombed so hard, and to see that turn around and do so well. Interviewing Yoshida, I've done that a few times, and talking to him about that process. It's just been really cool to watch. See.
Cool. Okay. What is a guilty pleasure for you guys? Doesn't have to necessarily be gaming, but we could stick to gaming. Feel free to get very intimate, like.
Yeah,
like
it's only on
you're-
Twitch.
yeah.
Just get intimate. Yeah, really detailed.
I like watching other people play games more than myself playing them. Especially on a hard game like Cuphead. I feel like I enjoy it more when somebody really good is playing.
Big Septiceye fan.
Yeah.
Big Game Grumps fan.
Somebody bad is playing too. Son of a.
Yeah, those are fun too.
To me, it's always going to be something about Smash. Okay. Just watching like matches go down is a lot of fun, and even just like taking part with different characters and screwing around and maybe actually discovering something that works for you. I mean, that's the best thing about playing like new games is just discovering something that clicks in your head and just really works with you. And I mean, that's why I'm excited for Smash on Switch. I want to see what they introduce.
Okay. Yeah. So you guys know the term paying your dues. Yeah. It's a pretty common phrase. At what point in your life could you say, yeah, that was my time of paying my dues?
I feel like I thought of that several times.
I'm still paying my dues.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still paying my dues. I would say like maybe more like a turning point was probably when I went to E3 2000 for the first time. I think that was like, you know, it showed that my effort in writing actually was making a difference, and now I was on this place where I'm able to see like what's coming and I can apply that to my writing. I think like once you really get out there and start talking to people and start seeing the stuff that it's about, I mean, even you know, it doesn't even have to be as major as E3. Like coming to someplace like PAX or MomoCon, you know, and talking to the people here, it just shows like how far you've gotten and how interested, you know, people are in talking to you and showing off their games, or even just like goofing off with you, playing Taiko Drum Master at 1 in the morning like I was doing last night. It was amazing. I think it's just a matter of once you reach that point where people are interested in talking to you and you're interested in talking back, and you have this great connection, I think that's when you know you really feel like you belong in the industry.
So would you say going to an expo like E3 is definitely worth it?
I'd say it's worth it. Lately, it's changed with the public thing, letting the public in, because it used to be a trade show, so it's a little more crowded than it used to be. But there's definitely nothing like it. I mean, the companies there, they're amazing, and the stuff they present is amazing. And you know, like PR works overtime, and developers work overtime. You know, and the press conferences are something else. I mean, watching on TV is fun too, or watching online, but I definitely recommend, if you get a chance, go walk the floor and enjoy yourself. Just don't stand too much in awe, because there are people who are probably going to like run over you. Don't do that. Just find a safe spot, then look in awe, then move on.
I feel like it's something that I did, like going into this, wanted to touch on. I did a lot of work that I didn't get paid for. And I'm going to advocate for you guys for a minute that are getting into the industry. Your work is worth money. It's worth a lot. And it's great to intern, and I had great experiences interning. The places I interned for were incredible. But there were other situations where I did work that I didn't get paid for, and you should get paid for your work. But I feel like I paid my dues doing that, and it's rough, and it's really rough when that happens, and you'll have some down moments. But I feel like that was pretty important to highlight.
So would you say not getting paid is a possibility, or should you never compensate?
I don't think it's just this industry either. Definitely not just this industry, but a lot of people will, ask you to do something and not compensate you, and it kind of feels like you're paying your dues there. But I would say intern for sure. But there's a blur. There's a gray line there.
Fine line.
Yeah, the idea of the paid versus the unpaid internship is a tough one.
Yeah.
We pay all our interns, just for the record. But I can say that if I were starting out and I had a spot at a game studio and it was unpaid, we can talk about whether or not that would be fair or not, but it would be valuable. And I don't know what to tell you about whether you should get paid. Like I said, we're safely on the paid side, but it's just being in a studio, a working studio, there are definitely internships that you can get that are not that great because you're working at a dysfunctional studio and you're learning bad things. But if it's a game you like or a studio that you like or admire and you get a chance to get started there, first of all, many studios use the internship program as secretly a extended 3-month interview. And so if you get to the end of it and, that you might get a job then, or a year later, or when you get out of school or things like that. It's sort of a reality. Certainly we have hired several of our interns to be permanent, so I don't quite know what to tell you about the paid versus the paid part, but it is a valuable experience, or it can be.
Yeah, because it's easy to fall in the trap of getting that internship where they're just looking for, free labor.
Sure.
I think. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I just want to say it's tricky on the management side to be because particularly unpaid interns, because I always feel like if you're not paying somebody, it's harder to yell at them, and so I don't. I like to kind of stick with being able to. But yeah, tough question. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I'll just reiterate what these guys said, because I couldn't agree more. I think a foot in the door is very valuable, especially if it's in a studio that you really want to be in, just getting a feel for the inner workings of a company, and that could be through an unpaid internship. I think freelancing for free is very dangerous, and that's somewhere I see a lot of artists getting kind of roped into doing that. And we'll give you exposure, and we'll pay you if we make money, like you'll make money, and a lot of independent projects know how to kind of sell themselves in a way that might seem enticing, but I think you should be wary of that.
Sorry, I was wondering, because that's a great point, and along those lines, the internship where you're not actually on site, you're interning by doing a bunch of free work, are you sure that's an internship and not just doing free work? It's a big difference of being on site and learning about the studio versus somebody telling you that you're in an internship but you stay home.
The advice I like to give is that if you're going to work for free, to work for yourself for free, because that's developing your skills in specifically the area that you want to grow in. And for me, what I've done when I've been working at jobs that I didn't feel like creatively fulfilled is I would try to make time to go home and work on like an animation test or something that like was pushing me in a direction that I wanted to grow in. And that's been so much more valuable for me than donating my time to somebody else's sort of pet project. So if you do have time and energy to spare, do it for yourself. Don't do it for somebody else's random project.
Yeah, building upon that, that's a great point. If you are looking to start writing, just write a blog for yourself. Develop those skills necessary. Think about a game that you really love and just write about it. It could be Castlevania, it could be Xenosaga, it could be Cuphead, it could be anything. Just write about it. If you're looking to do video work, try a YouTube channel. You may not get 40,000 views, you may only get 4 views, but it's yours, and it's something that you can build upon, something that you can just really just stack up. And don't be one of those people be like, well, I have a YouTube channel, do I get free games now? No, you're not going to get free games until you establish yourself to the point that, oh, okay, would you like to take a look at a game? Don't beg for one. By all means, don't beg for one, because that's bad news. Just build yourself up and do it for you, and eventually, but it may take a little time, but people will notice that. Talk to people at cons, talk to people on social media. Don't be a dick, but talk to people on social media. I think that goes a long way.
Nice. Let's do this. Kind of off of that, with the social media, how should a young artist brand themselves, or should they even brand themselves?
That's a great question, because I feel like when I was kind of fresh out of school, I knew my interest was in 2D animation, but I didn't find any jobs for 2D animation, so I tried to sell myself as everything. Like, I like to design characters, and I like to do storyboards, and I like to animate. And I realized the hard way that nobody wants to make that decision for you. No recruiter is going to take a portfolio that has a little bit of everything with no clear indication of what your specialization is, and say like, I'm going to send this portfolio to animation, or I'm going to send this portfolio to design. So even if you're like me and you didn't want to kind of pinhole yourself in one area because you like to do everything, I feel like either make different portfolios for different job applications, or just find the one thing that interests you the most, and make sure that if somebody looks at your reel or your blog or whatever, they know instantly what you want to do. So if you're an animator, there's nothing wrong with having some character designs or some figure drawing or other like complementary things, but make sure that the thing that stands out the most about you is your character animation. Or if you want to be, you know, a story artist, then make sure storyboards are like front and center. Or if you want to be a programmer, make sure you showcase that skill above everything else. So diversity is great, but I think being specialized in the interest of finding a job is very important.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
So one thing that I really like, so, you know, there's a whole lecture to be had on the very, very extreme importance of your portfolio if you're an artist, and how we get applications all the time from literally artists who do not send us the portfolio. And they're being told in schools, oh, you need the cover letter, you need this, you need that, you need your resume to say this. You need your portfolio. Everything else is secondary if you're an artist. The lead artist will get this big list of applications, and he'll just start clicking on portfolios until one of them catches his eye, and then everything else happens. But nothing happens until they see a portfolio that makes them feel excited. So when you're building your portfolio, like you said, have the first few things in that portfolio be the most relevant and your best work. So then the next thing that happens after we look at somebody, art director, whoever, looks at your portfolio, they get excited about it, is they Google you looking for your Tumblr or your Instagram. Maybe if your Facebook, you're gonna try and find, and there's a lot more room for just whatever you wanna work on. Because there is where what they're looking for is a working artist, right? That's what's exciting. That's, oh, they're doing Inktober and they're throwing up something every day and they're talking to their artist friends, because the best artists talk to the other best artists. And so you're looking for people who are sort of in those communities. And then especially, and this is if you're talking about breaking into the industry, this is definitely something to start doing now, because if you're thinking, oh, my work is garbage, I don't want to put it on Tumblr yet, it's not good enough, I know where it's not, I don't need to start, you know, Instagram post or whatever. First of all, posting that's just going to be super valuable for getting feedback, for looking at your own work and having this history of your own work. And then second of all, an employer or potential employer is going to look at that, and they're going to look from the beginning to now, and they're going to see, here's somebody who's getting better. And here's somebody who's getting better, oh, month over month. Look how they had stuff 3 years ago. This wasn't their portfolio, right? So you're like, you're safe. But they're seeing a story of a growing artist. And that's exciting, right? That's like, oh, okay, well, if they went 2 years ago, they were here, and now they're here. Well, just imagine where they're going to be in 2 more years, you know? And that creates that story. So it's super important, A, to get started now on it, because of the general value of having those kind of things and creating a story of yourself. And then, yeah. So anyway, sorry, mini lecture.
No, you're fine. That was very
and
good.
don't shy away from showing interests outside of your industry. And
right.
I think there's a lot of value in being able to kind of get inspired by different things. I feel like one of the benefits of being more an animator in a game world is that I don't have a lot of preconceptions of what a game character can and can't do. So I might throw a lot of ideas that are, you know, that wouldn't work for games, but I might also throw a lot of ideas that somebody who's super kind of in that world and is so used to getting all of their feedback and all of their influence from games might not think about. So I think, you know, take interest in other things, and even if like gaming is sort of your world or your biggest source of influence, like embrace the other things that inspire you too, you know, and it doesn't have to be, could be, you know, music, sports, or theater, or whatever. And it's nice to see that in somebody's portfolio as well, because you know that you're not just getting an artist, you're getting like a well-rounded person who's got like other things in their life.
Okay, I think we're going to open it up for questions now. A little bit of housekeeping before you guys line up. Our runner is right there by the mic, our beautiful runner. She's waving her hand. Please keep the questions appropriate because it's only 4:30, it's not 8 o'clock yet. Please be, what's the word? Appropriate and kind. All right, go ahead, guys.
There's a,
Yeah, we're lining up.
yeah.
Okay, so I have a more programming specific question. We ended up with the whole artist creating their portfolio. What could that look like for a programmer? Because the
Yeah, I have
programming
the
of the
answer.
game is very large area to go into.
When you're a programmer, two things. One, be ready for the programming test. That is the gatekeeper, and to all studios and everyone who's good, every studio that has programmers there who you want to work with, that programming test is the gatekeeper for them. And you know, if you go to some place that doesn't have a programming test, then you get worried. And you can get better at programming tests. You can get so much better, like the ACM, just going on, Top Coder, things like that. I don't know, there's some others that have grown up since then. But that kind of practice, that sort of specific programming test practice, it helps so much when you get into a programming test. Either you get a programming test by mail and you're knocking it out and you're like, or especially if you're used to working under the gun like that, you know, a lot of these programming tests are timed. That's going to help you so much when you're in front of a whiteboard and you're getting programming questions. I really can't overstate how valuable that can be. And plus, it's just like one thing that the programming staff is looking for with the programming test is they want people who can program, right? But then the other thing they're looking for secretly is they want people who like to program, right? So the idea is when you get the programming test, they're looking for someone who's not like rolling their eyes and scared and whatever else. They're looking for somebody who's like, ooh, okay, let's figure this out, you know? Somebody who thinks it's fun. And so that's the number one thing. And then the number two thing gets back to projects. It gets back to, if you can show this mod you worked on, where you changed some things, you can show your own game that you developed. Anything that you've taken to completion is super valuable because, you know, as we all know, the first 90% of the game takes the first 90% of the time, and the other 10% of the game takes the other 90% of the time, right? So if you're a person who's done that in their own work and sort of seen how hard that last 10% is, you know, that's a big plus. Again, I'm rambling, but that's
No, it's great.
You're fine.
Thank you.
those are my first few things. I have more stuff about programming if you want to pull my string again later.
I have a question for Matt. Will you be here after the show? Because I would like to talk to you one-on-one. Oh,
Yes, no, it's definitely true that if you are a 2D artist and you don't give me your card after this show, you weren't listening.
okay. Yeah, because I was listening, and I want to expand my pool of people I know.
And this gets back to what you were saying about going ahead and applying to jobs that do not have openings, because it's much more fluid than most people think. Most people kind of have this idea of like, there's a job opening and then it gets filled. And really there's kind of everybody always needs more people, kind of, sort of. And so there's this constant sort of flowing opportunity hire world that's going on. And if you can get in there at that time, if you can get in there when there's not 1,000 resumes on somebody's desk, that can be really valuable.
Okay, thanks.
Hello. So what sort of advice do you have for someone who's self-taught and someone who's in college?
I mean, luckily we're in an industry where credentials don't matter as much as your work. So I feel like the only reason to have like a bachelor's or a master's degree is if you want to teach. A lot of colleges don't let you teach if you don't have a master's degree, which I think is a little silly because so few experienced animators or artists or game developers have those degrees. There's, you know, most of the greats grew up in a time when there was no education for what they did. So I think if you're self-taught, that's perfectly fine. And there's so many resources to learn online that you don't really need a degree. And luckily, yeah, I mean, I think the games and animation industries both don't really look at your credentials. Like they care about the work you've done.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm a full-time software engineer and a hobby game designer, game developer on the side. In the past, I've worked with teams to something called the Global Game Jam, or sort of like a hackathon for gaming, and we've worked on stuff on the side. So I have a lot of unfinished gaming projects. So my question is, how do I go from being this hobby game designer, game programmer, to something actually working in the industry and business? Because I can't see myself going back and finishing some of these things by myself, because they were definitely team projects.
I don't know, I guess find a way to show finished work, I think, because there's no substitute for showing that you could finish something. If it's super dependent on other people, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that a lot of people turn to like crowdfunding for things that you don't have the resources yourself, but I don't know.
Sometimes it's a matter of word of mouth. I mean, if you have access to like social media, that can be like the greatest thing. Like post like YouTube videos of the stuff that you're working on. Like you'd be really surprised like how many developers just start out by like showing like this small showcase of stuff on video, and then it starts building, and then people start following how that development is going along. And then you know, you can just post stuff on Twitter and Facebook. Hey, here's my project. You know, I'm not trying to make this super advertisey, but this is what I'm working on. Let me know what you think. You know, and that's when you start to get the feedback rolling in, and you can actually make like improvements if you think they're worth noting. You know, and then as it goes along, it builds up steam. That's not to say, you know, like somebody's going to swoop in. Oh, I'd love to publish this. That's not the case, but it makes progress, and you can add to your project from there, and it gets closer and closer to what you want it to be. So I think like in terms of finding exposure, it never hurts to put yourself out there socially. Again, don't be a dick about it. Don't develop an ego, but definitely put your best foot forward, show your initiative, and you know, talk about it. You know, like while you're showing off some gameplay video, this is how I came up with this. This is how I came up with this, because then people can see what kind of thought process you put into your creation. And that's when they become more and more interested in what you're doing, and then you can show more progress as it goes along. So I think that's the best way to go.
Yeah, so just for the record, game jams are great. They are a great way. They combine the networking stuff we talked about, the programming practice stuff we talked about, and the getting started on it. Because the way a game jam works for you folks who don't know is that you go in and they say, okay, we're going to have 24 hours, we're going to have 48 hours, we're going to have whatever. And at the beginning of it, you're either alone or in teams. We're going to give you a prompt, and you know, I don't even know what the prompt could be, but then you build a game on that prompt, and the goal is to have a completed something, no matter how small, by the end of the 48 hours, and it's really fun, and you don't sleep, and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of it, you have to be done with something. You have to have something that you can show, which is A, great practice, and B, what you're talking about is it is difficult to, having done that a bunch of times, to think, all right, how do I go to the next step? How do I, first of all, evaluate the game jam projects that I've done and say which one of these really has legs? And one of those is just to do a lot. Don't do your first game jam project. Whatever it is, you think it's great at the end of that 48 hours because you haven't slept, and you're like, I'm going to get a team together and we're going to turn this into something awesome, and you're not. But if you do a bunch of those, you start to kind of get a feel for the ideas, and then you can kind of find something. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It is tough, and I've seen a lot of indie studios start with a game jam idea, and it's really tough to go from that to something that you can ship on mobile or Steam is probably what would be your target. And yeah, the answer is it's hard. It's way easier than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but it's still hard.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for talking. I was wondering if you had any advice for someone who's just starting their first job or internship about how to make the most of it.
Yeah, just work hard.
I think getting my hands into everything was, well, under my first manager. It's easy to fall into one spot. Like whenever I was working in PR, I'll do this one little thing and be good at this one little thing. But thankfully, I've had a lot of bosses that were like, we're going to get you into everything. So look at everything going on around you. Don't just focus on what you're doing. What are your managers doing? What are your peers doing? And I think that's a really valuable experience to kind of cross-train.
If you're at a larger studio, meet people. This is like golden. We're talking about networking before. It's like I've seen the intern who comes in, they sit in the corner, they spend their 3 months, there's gone, nobody knew their name at the end of it. That is not valuable. I mean, well, it's still valuable, but that was a missed opportunity, right? To like talk to people, to eat lunch with folks, to kind of get yourself into the studio, not only because it's just super great networking, but also if you're looking to get a job there, at the end of it, you know, they're all going to sit in a room and be like, well, what did we think? And so that's a thing that definitely pops in my head as a spot to kind of make sure you cover.
So work really hard and make friends. That's right.
Hello, thank you guys for coming out. So I've always been really interested in like video game storytelling, and I want to be a video game writer or like a video game journalist. So my question is for you all. Are there like any recent examples of games or games that you have played where like the storytelling like really stuck out to you, like as an inspiration?
To me, it'd probably be something like, I think Celeste is a good example. There are just so many. Iconoclasts was this really great game that came out for Vita and PlayStation 4 that was really good in terms of the story it told, and it really, there's so many. I mean, that's the cool thing nowadays is a lot more people, even like God of War, you know, the latest God of War tells a great story in itself, you know, and you know, all these AAA developers are like, well, what about multiplayer? Well, that's great and all, sure, Fortnite for the win. But, you know, you want to have good single-player experiences, too, that you delve deep into, you know, and I'm really, in regards to that, I think it's just a matter of looking for stuff that stands out, and stuff you normally wouldn't look for. You know, like I said, Celeste is just a really good example. You know, people jump into that, and they don't expect to be blown away by a story. So just keep an eye out for stuff that isn't really normal, I'd say.
Hey, thank you.
Hi. Tying off of that last question, games like that with heavy narrative or heavy dialogue, where are those writers coming from? How are they recruited?
I think presenting like different examples. Like there was a game that came out this weekend called Detroit Become Human, the latest game from Quantic Dream. These guys, they know how to structure a story because there are different ways that story can go. You know, you can be a jerk, you know, you can make decisions to save everybody, and it plays out a number of different ways. I think if you set up, the way you set up your writing is that the more options that you present, the more interesting things get. I mean, it is great to have a beginning and an end, but it's even better when you give the player the option to, you know, go from a beginning and several different ends. You know, like there's different ways that this, I mean, I can't wait to play Detroit Become Human when I get home because it's going to be amazing, like how many directions that can go. So I think with the writing examples I've seen, the best option you present is when you give the player the choice to decide where they want to go. It's even as something as simple as like Mass Effect 3 and whether you want to be, you know, like the good or the bad, you know. Sometimes just simple decisions can go a long way.
So how would you showcase a writing portfolio, for example? Because I think that's kind of a tricky thing.
Yeah, presenting like, you know, an elaborate like idea like that, it takes a lot of effort. It really does. I think, I don't know, have my experience in like, you know, actually writing on a game. I'm more of the journalist type, but from the examples I've seen, what they do is they present these scenarios, and they lay them out. I'm like, this is the way option A can take. This is the way option B can take. This is the way option C can take. Now, not all developers are going to be interested in that. Sometimes they just want, you know, okay, can we go this way? That's it. But by presenting like the different scenarios, I'm presenting like the different routes you can take. People can see that you're prepared for like any given scenario, and sometimes they'll even roll with that idea. I mean, based upon a couple of people who have a writing experience like that, they really grasp the idea of just story doesn't have to go a certain way. Sometimes experimentation is actually really good.
Yeah, storytelling for games, being a writer for games is a tough industry to break, or tough line to get into the games industry. And like you're saying, it's really, I think, going to be all about your personal projects to start with. And the way I would jump into it if I were doing it would definitely be starting with text-based adventures. That's a good place where you don't have to have an artist, you don't need a programmer. There's tools out there, and I was trying to remember the name of it. It's like Loom or Papyrus. Say again? Twine. Twine is the one that I used recently just to mock some stuff up, and I was like, wow, you don't need to be a programmer, you don't need to be anything, you can just lay it out. It's got the trees, it's a lot of the stuff that you were talking about being able to just sort of start thinking in terms of non-linear storytelling. And also, at the end of the day, you have a product that you can put out on a forum, that you can put on your own website, that you can do stuff like this and be like, hey, okay, here's kind of where I am in that development, because yeah, it's tough.
Thanks.
Oh, guys, just so you know, we have about 5 minutes left for questions, okay?
Okay. Hello. I was just wondering what I sounded like. And on a serious note, I have my own game project that I'm working on, and I was kind of just wondering, in the longevity of it. I was wondering, what is the viability of making a game project in one language?
In one language,
C++?
yes, do it in one language.
C++? Yes.
Yes, C++
Okay,
is great. Use an engine if you're an early project. What engine are you using?
SFML, Simple Fast Media Library.
Okay, I don't know that one, but definitely start with an engine.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you'll have no trouble and also you're learning C++, which is going to be your most valuable language to learn.
Hello? Okay. So from the more like the sort of business side, what's between making a indie company, like a LLC, like a int studio, what's the point? What's the difference, or why would you?
So what kind of company structure is best for a small indie company?
Yeah. And what's the difference between them?
I don't know. I think the most common is a LLC. It's like a limited liability company. There are tax reasons to incorporate, but if you're really small, LLC I think is the way to go, because it's just a step further from just being a freelancer or a sole proprietor. So my wife and I have an LLC because we do a lot of freelance, but I don't know a lot of in-depth business. So.
Yeah, you automatically have a sole proprietorship just by existing. You don't really have to do anything to set up a sole proprietorship. That's kind of what you automatically are if you're just working or freelancing or whatever. And then LLC is the natural step that you kind of want to look at. And the natural spot to look at that is if you're doing a lot of freelancing, or B, you're working with a lot of partners. So depending on kind of where you are in the process, setting up a formal LLC and being very explicit about what the ownership of the project is a good idea. But if you feel like you're not there yet, you're not I want to set up an LLC, it's still super valuable if you're working with a team, if you're working with 4 or 5 people, to write down on a piece of paper what the understanding is, right, early on. And just, you guys, you talked it over, everyone's in agreement, just write it down. There's a lot of value there in, like I said, the natural step would be to go ahead and set it up as an LLC, and then you know exactly what the ownership is. But if you're not ready to do that, just write it down. Write it down. Me and this other person are exactly 50-50. Write that down on a piece of paper, or I'm bringing this and they're bringing this, and this other person is just a contractor. Write that stuff down. Yeah, I'm also not a lawyer.
Hello, and thank you for your just fabulous advice, you guys. Your words have been better than gold today. But I actually wanted more of an opinion than anything else. I was kind of wondering what your opinions are on the move towards a games as service business model in the industry.
Oh, games as a service, yeah. So something along the lines of, judging from my experience, it depends on how it's set up. Like, I think I'm more of a fan of buying the games and having the games in your library. I mean, some people like to use cloud service, but then you take a look at like the effects of it, because like, what if it goes offline? You know, like somebody was telling me a few days ago, Resident Evil 7 came out for Nintendo Switch, but it was as a streaming thing, and you're not really buying the game, you're kind of renting it, and it just sounds iffy. Like, what if the connection goes out, you know? And PlayStation now is not doing as hot as it is, but then you have something like Xbox Game Pass, which is pretty ideal for $10 a month. The new games are included, and if it goes offline, you still have the games in your library, and you still kind of play them if they're authorized. I don't have it myself, so I can't really say for sure, but I mean, I know some people are fans of games as a service. Me, I think it still needs to be set up so it's more effective. Because, I mean, like I said, all it takes is one online server knockout, and there is no games as a service. So I think it's something that could use some work. But there are some ideas there. Like I said, Xbox Game Pass is pretty novel, but it just needs some work.
I run a game as a service, so I'm more or less for it. But
sorry, not to,
no,
not to
I'm
make you
teasing.
look
I'm teasing. But in terms of as an indie, in terms of breaking up, getting your first project, don't start with a game as a service. Start as a box product.
Yep.
There's just a whole lot fewer moving parts to think about.
And you don't have to worry about online at all.
That's right.
Unless, of course, you know.
Okay, guys, can we please thank our guests? I hope you guys have a great rest of con. See you later.
Take care, guys.